Hello, everybody. My name is Alan Singer, and this is a session on student climate activism and civics education. I'm a teacher, educator, and historian at Hofstra University in the New York metropolitan area. Our panelists are New York teachers at Iola Teller Williams from Uniondale and Pablo and Miriah, Dennis Morales from the Bronx. And they will discuss their thoughts on student activism and climate change. And we have a New York City high school student, Sadia Weiner from Brooklyn. We're also joined by teacher education students from Hofstra University, and we want to thank you for joining us. Over the last 200 years, virtually unregulated capitalist industrialization has polluted land, water, and air, and produce climate changes that threaten to become a climate catastrophe. The lives of billions of people are endangered by global warming, intensified storms, prolonged droughts, rising sea levels, and depleted food and freshwater reserves. Young people today confront a world they did not create, with serious problems the adults in their lives, parents, family, friends, teachers, and political leaders have been unwilling or unable to resolve. Swedish teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg warns, "Our house is on fire." As teachers and activists, how do we best prepare a new generation to be active participants in preserving and transforming democratic societies, in generating solutions that meet the needs of people, that respect and heal the environment, and promote international cooperation? Brazilian educator Paulo Freire argued that progressive educational and social goals can only be achieved when students explicitly critique social injustice and actively organize to change oppression, to challenge oppression. In the United States, the National Council for the Social Studies argues that producing knowledgeable, thinking, and active citizens is essential for preservation of a democratic society. That means students need the intellectual power to recognize societal problems, ask good questions, and develop robust investigations to consider possible solutions and consequences, and to act upon what they learn. Student mastery of civic ideals is measured by their ability to apply a range of deliberative and democratic strategies. We interpret to act what they learn in school and out of school context as a call for informed student political action. The week before the September 20, 2019 global student strike for climate action, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio tweeted, "New York City stands with our young people. They're our conscience. We support the 9/20 climate strike." The city's Department of Education decided that students with parental permission could attend the climate action rally, and it would be counted as an excused absence. Then 2 days before the rally, de Blasio and the DOE backtracked. They announced that participation could not be part of a formal school trip and that teachers could not accompany their students. Unfortunately, the reversal came too soon before the rally to effectively challenge the decision. Tens of thousands of students ended up attending the New York City rally, a defining teachable moment, except their teachers were not there with them to teach. De Blasio and the DOE were wrong. Civics education means teachers must be out there marching with their students, modeling what it means to be active citizens, promoting democracy and social justice, and struggling to reverse the demonstrating climate change that threatens human civilization. I want to share a video of the student march. Madison, can you see it? Okay. And you can hear it.
No justice, no peace. There's no planet peace. No justice, no peace. There's no planet peace. This is the largest protest that I've been to besides the Women's March. This time it's kids striking from school for climate change on the second-year anniversary of Hurricane Maria. There are over 1,000 actions happening in all 50 states and 150 worldwide. So this is a massive movement. We've grown up seeing the political establishment fail us. And for twice as long as I have been alive on this planet, we have known about the crisis. For just as long, the wealthy and the powerful have profited off of pollution, have lied to millions of people about the science, have choked our democracy with their big oil dollars and stolen our future. Today, this generation is taking over. Our days of waiting for justice, our days of waiting for action, our days of waiting to be heard are over. Am I right? We need to save the planet. The Amazon is burning. The earth is on fire. Ice is melting. We need to make change. We need to make change. I would rather live than go to school. I know that sounds interesting, but I'd rather live to learn more than go to school today and learn less because our earth is destroyed.
It shouldn't have to take us all together screaming for climate change for us to help our world. You know, like this should be normal.
I am eternally frustrated with the decisions that our lawmakers are making because it is putting us, our lives, our children's lives, and our grandchildren's lives at risk. And they can't see that because they're old. And as like a young person, and we're all relatively young people, we know this is the one chance we have before we're gone. Our planet is dying, and we are doing nothing to save it. We need to march to help save our planet. All the adults are helping us with our future, like going to college and stuff, but there's no point if there's not going to be an earth for us to like stay at. We gotta like keep this earth, otherwise there's nothing for us to fight for.
I teach at a college, one of the local colleges, Hobson University. But I was a former New York City high school teacher, so this is very exciting. You know, one of the things I said to the students is that in 30 years, where we're sitting now is maybe underwater. I'm not worried because I'm 70 and I'll be 100. But you have to worry, and they're here, and that's great.
I really want to have kids one day, and I don't think morally, ethically, I could bring a human into the world knowing that this is going to happen. I want to live past 25 on an earth that's inhabitable. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, we only have one earth. You're down for living past 25? Yeah, just a little bit. Don't destroy your planet. We want to invade it.
The world is changing, and not in a good way. We need to save our world. We need to have a future. The Amazons are burning down. We need more trees. They need to plant more trees and save the seas. We need a future.
Well, that was pretty exciting.
Hi there, welcome to Forward. Come on in.
Oh,
I'm Dr.
I didn't turn it off.
Forward, and I'm excited to be giving you a tour of our location. The first thing you're going to note.
Oh. I forgot to turn it off. All right. I want to introduce our three panelists, Adiola Teller-Williams, Dennis Morales, and Pablo Miriah. And then we'll introduce the rest of our group. Adiola, why don't you tell people about yourself, who you are, where you teach, and why you consider yourself an activist, and how you try to involve your students. You're muted.
That's like the slogan, right? You're muted. What are we gonna do after Zoom? So thank you so much, Alan, for inviting me on this so important topic about climate change. I saw on the flyer that Vandana Shiva is going to be at this climate change, and I am so honored, even if I'm on tape, that I get to be in her energy space, even if it's through the ether. She is amazing and she's doing great things. Greta Thunberg as well is doing great things, and to be again in their energy space or through the ether is pretty special. So as Alan said, yes, I'm Adiola Teller Williams. I'm an educator here in New York, on Long Island, a suburb. And I've been teaching for over 20 years. I've taught in New York City, I've taught abroad in Japan, and I've also taught in the Middle East. And I am settled here now in Long Island. Why am I an activist? I consider myself an activist because, as Alan mentioned, when we teach, we just don't teach for knowledge, right? We're definitely teaching to get our scholars to know information, but how do you transfer that information and help kids apply the knowledge? And I feel that's where the activism comes in for me, because number one, I'm not teaching to a test, right? I'm teaching for students to learn how to think and to act on what it is they have learned. Goldie Muhammad and people like Gloria Lanson Billings, culturally relevant education, talk about criticality. Criticality, Paul Ferreira, as Alan mentioned, talks about student critiquing. Is the same thing. Activism. So getting our scholars to actually be a part of the world that we teach them about in the classroom. So taking that theory out and making it more practical. So I am an activist teacher, yes. I have had my scholars on many different platforms, be it climate change, yes, that's one of the platforms I would say that I have done the least on, and I'll tell you why. Climate change is an issue for sure out here on Long Island, but when you live in the suburbs and your grass is always green when it's supposed to be, and your leaves fall when they're supposed to be, and when they're supposed to, many of our scholars really don't pay attention too much to how the climate affects them. I think that they notice, but they are not as conscious of it as scholars who may live in the city who are directly affected by climate change. And so my focus has really been on racial justice and segregation here on Long Island, and definitely hitting on the community activism aspect. Many of our scholars, however, here on the island are noticing that in their neighborhoods, in their segregated neighborhoods, I work in a predominantly Black and Latino or melanated neighborhood, and many of our scholars have noticed that we have grocery stores that are not as up to par as grocery stores that are in, well-to-do neighborhoods. I would think that that is a climate issue as well, because the foods that they're getting are not climate friendly, right? So you have a lot of meat, you don't have a lot of vegan options. And as we know, when we talk about, cows and chickens, they really take up a lot of water, a lot of grass, a lot of land, and that is a climate issue. So in that indirect way, my scholars are definitely activists when it comes to climate change. And so they want to see a change in their neighborhood when it comes to food sourcing. They also want to see a change in terms of the pollution, the air pollution that is starting to come into the suburbs. So right here where I live, there's a famous Coliseum called the Nassau Coliseum. And they plan on building a hub meaning they're bringing in more apartments close to Hofstra University. They're also bringing in, there's a Sloan Kettering is there. And so you're gonna have more car pollution. So my scholars are also concerned about that. They've been attending community meetings, civic organization meetings to express how they feel about the hub that's coming in. And they spoke to Kavan Abrahams, who is one of our legislators in charge of our district. And they spoke to him about how they are going to cut down on not just pollution, air pollution, but noise pollution as well. So my scholars are very aware of climate change and how it affects them, but they're also aware of the racial injustice that is here on Long Island as well. The fact that Long Island is so segregated has really segregated the how our kids or lack thereof, they don't interact with each other. And so you don't have that collective consciousness like you saw in that video, where you see white students and Hispanic students and, you know, brown, black students together, marching together. You don't have that here on Long Island because everybody's in their own little pocket fighting the fight, but no one is coming together. And so that is a huge issue in our community. And so it really reduces the number of scholars that can be aware of more of the issues around climate change because the island is so segregated, so they don't talk to each other. I run a program called Bridges with a neighboring white district, and I hate to say that, but it's true. I have a neighboring white district, and we're all Black and Latino districts, and we meet together to talk about these things. We talk about climate change. We talk about the George Floyd incident. We talk about so many things just to help the kids bridge the gap between the races, so to speak. And so when we talk about activism, those are the ways that I bring activism into my district and to my scholars as well. I actually am starting a club with my own children who are 7 and 9. I'm starting a neighborhood cleanup crew. So we are going to be going around picking up garbage in our neighborhood, and we are going to invite some neighborhood kids. We're making t-shirts, and I'm starting them young because I realize that, you know, the schools can do a lot, but it starts at home. So I want to get my own children, 7 and 9, into the act of learning about their environment, and so they can turnkey that when they go to school and be activists, and they don't have to wait for teachers to say, okay, come on, let's start a recycling club, that they demand of their schools to start those clubs and to get those kids together. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Adiola. Dennis Morales, introduce yourself and then discuss your activism.
Hello, so my name is Dennis Morales. I teach in the South Bronx. I teach at Taft High School. That's where I grew up. I mean, I grew up in the South Bronx, and I teach now where I grew up at. Taft High School is now split up. So within one of those tiny schools, when it got split up in like 2010, I teach at Dream Yard. It's a part of the Dream Yard project. For those who don't know, it's like an activist group, and they try to foster social justice. Funny, I ended up at the school just like that. Like that was just where opportunity lied, being an activist. I started being an activist back in high school, actually, when I was in Pablo's class. Pablo was my teacher. Started in 11th grade, and it was honestly through education. It was literally like one, through education, two, the school that we were in. The school that we were in had metal detectors, and, you know, day in and day out, we just felt like, you know, we were being fostered fostered into a school to prison pipeline, essentially, because, you know, we just got scanned. You had security guards, I'm sorry, they're not police officers, they are a task force for the police, but they're not police officers, who would like constantly ask me like, oh, are you high? Did you smoke today? And I don't smoke. I was just tired because I worked, I had long hours, I helped my home. So I was always tired, if I'm being honest. I kind of drew a line one time. We were mad when I had to walk in. It was winter time, and I had Timberland boots on. If you know it, that they have a thick sole, like 3 inches, 2 inches. So you have to take them off. I refused to take them off. I was arguing with the security guard because the floor was wet with snow. So if I took them off, my socks were going to be wet. So I refused. They made it a big issue, and that's when I started getting upset. Me and my friend was going through the metal detector at the time. His name was Ibrahim Malpika. At the time, we were going through it. We went into Pablo's class. We were really mad and frustrated. Pablo asked, like, yo, what's wrong? What's wrong with you guys? So we told him how we felt about the metal detectors. We told him about that. So he proceeded with the lesson. He said, like, you know, afterward, we proceeded with the lesson. We were learning about the English Bill of Rights, right? And we were learning about the Bill of Rights. And, you know, after class, he noticed that we were still upset. You know, he tried to speak to us. He said, why don't you guys do something? And it's like, what you mean? I mean, do what? We can't really do anything. It's metal detectors. That's what it is. It's a system that's implemented just from there. Like, you have no choice but to, you know, go through it. And then he was like, you should do something. He's like, you know, we're learning about the Bill of Rights, right? People were fighting up for their rights. They were fighting for the rights. They were, you know, creating these rights that we live by day. So then me and Abraham Malpika looked at each other. It was like, I wonder if there's a student Bill of Rights, you know, because, like, we're different. It's in the school building. It's a public school. It's a little different. So we went ourselves. We met up after that. We went to the counselor's office. I didn't have a laptop at the time, and he didn't either. So we went to the counselor's office, and we looked it up. We saw it was like this blue book, and we recognized the blue book. The blue book was always inside the dean's office where me and him were never at. You know, where students the troublemakers get sent, you know, quote unquote, the troublemakers get sent to the dean. They sit there all day, and the books were in there. It was the same book. So we grabbed one. I took one. I think I still have mine somewhere here. I took it and we started reading through, and it was a Bill of Rights. We started seeing things, and then at the back of it was also like some of the handbooks, like some of the rules and protocols the DOE has to follow. And that's when we started learning about that. And then we looked online, and there was all these rules, but there was nothing about metal detectors and why they were placed in our neighborhood. And that's kind of where it started, like this whole idea of activism. Like, it was just through education. Like, we started looking through different things, started figuring out like that metal detectors were just arbitrarily placed. Like, some schools had them, some schools didn't, you know, and we're looking at like, yo, this is kind of funny. You know, there's certain schools in the neighborhood that do have it, some that don't. And the city's the city, no matter where you at, really, right? Because it's diverse, right? So we started to look through it, and we realized that there was no real rule as to why metal detectors were placed in New York City, you know, in New York City Public High School, specifically ours. Our school was a CT high school, right? I grew up fixing cars in high school. Like, that's what we knew how to do. So we had dangerous weapons right in the room all the time. They trusted us with that, right? We had dangerous weapons all the time. We had saws, we had knives, we had blades, we had screwdrivers, right? So those are tools that if you really wanted to cause harm, that essentially, and there was never an incident. I mean, the time that I've been there, even the times after that, there was never really an incident at Smith, you know, Alfred E. Smith High School, where I went to school at, where there was a kid stabbed somebody with something there. There was an incident in one of the shops or anything like that. There was never an incident, right? You hear all these incidents about other schools and stuff like that, but there was no incident in our school with none of that. So it's like, why is that being placed in our school? And we started to do more research and realized that we were just being pushed through a system, you know, that just made us feel like prisoners. Like, day in and day out, we just felt like prisoners. We just felt like we couldn't do anything. We felt trapped, you know? So, like, one of the reasons, and then I spoke to a lot of my friends at the time. A lot of people were agreeing with me. I had a lot of backlash, a lot of resistance at that time. I'm not going to lie, from teachers. It was very different because, you know, people kept sitting there and saying, like, Dennis, why do you want to remove metal detectors? And I told them that wasn't really my goal. My goal was to understand why they were placed in my school. That's number one. Maybe removal is following, right? But my first goal as a student at the time was to learn why were they placed in our school. Why were the demographics of our school were 99% Black and Latino? Why were they placed in our school? They said they had one white kid in our school. Never saw him, but the DOE says there was one white kid in our school. Never saw him though, you know. But I knew everybody, by the way, and everybody knew me. Pablo could vouch for that. I'd never seen that white kid, but I would like to see him one day, maybe, right? But, you know, while I was understanding why was it in our school, why was it placed there, why wasn't it placed somewhere else, right? Because incidents can happen anywhere in the city. Riverdale didn't have metal detectors, right? You look at Riverdale's right next to JFK. And if you look at the demographics of those two schools, right, one has metal detectors. I went to go play basketball. They have metal detectors. You have to go through it. We played RKA, which is Riverdale Kingsbridge Academy. No metal detectors when you go to play basketball. No metal detectors at all. You just walk in, but they watch you like hawks, though. They watch us like hawks. When we'll go in, they watch us, make sure we go to the locker room, things like that. And I became an activist because of that. Looking at how me and my friends were being disenfranchised and put through the system, we felt like we were, being treated as second-class citizens.
Dennis, before I turn it into Pablo, I'd like to respond to something that Adiola said and that you said. And I think it's very important in terms of this conference. During the COVID epidemic, the climate change movement has been in virtual hibernation, and we can't afford that anymore. What they have argued as a goal of this conference is what they call a just rebuild, that the movement for addressing climate change has to be a social justice movement, because Black, Latino, minority communities have suffered the worst because of climate change. Good example is flooding. You have cities like New Orleans, like Houston, that are overwhelmingly minority cities, and they've been flooded because of the stronger hurricanes. But Adiola on Long Island, Lakeview, an area has a constant problem with flooding because it's on a tidal flats. And when high tides come in, they flood the basements. And that's a Black community. As a matter of fact, because of housing segregation, it was one of the few areas that Blacks were allowed to move on Long Island originally. And then in terms of what Dennis was talking about, talk about the South Bronx. Well, the South Bronx is what they call a heat island. What does that mean? Because it is so overwhelmingly asphalt with very little green space, the temperatures in areas like the South Bronx, which are all minority, as Dennis said, they couldn't find a white kid, are higher than the temperatures in other parts of the city, in other parts of the area. And as a result, people who live in those communities are more subject to stress-related diseases, like high blood pressure, like asthma, because they're living in these heat islands. I know Dennis wanted to say something else before we switch to Pablo.
The only thing I was going to add to that is that's where I became an activist in terms of how I don't force students to do like my students now. Like now that I have my own set of students, my own set of seniors, I don't it's kind of weird to say that because like Adiola was right there. She saw me when I was like 18, 19. But now that I have my own set of students, like I don't force the whole metal detector kind of, debate on them. But what I do and the project that I created within my school was known as the Two Americas. And we're planning to now they want to keep it for like years to come. But you touched on exactly what we do in the science portion. So I teach government and economics. For the government portion of it, it's like a capstone project at the end of government class, at the end of what is known as science research, right? So it's a science class, and now at the end of what is known as financial literacy. So we did like a cross curriculum project, right, where we did it. And basically science research is talking about Asthma Alley in the Bronx, which is right on 149. Financial literacy is talking about housing segregation. And, we use like the Levittown Covenants in Long Island as an example. And then in my government class, I talked about voting and how people have been disenfranchised in voting. And it's 5 teachers that are part of that team that we created. And we just try to, get the students to start thinking critically about not only climate change, not only about healthcare, not only about, voting, other things that they might not think really affects them. And we created that project, and they were planning to use it. We just did it this year because I mentioned it to them, and we created it, and I wanted to call it the Two Americas because I read a book like that. I read a book, and it was like talking about 2 different sides of America. Black America and white America. And I came up with that idea to like kind of help the students to get, become activists, and one of our students named Lucky, she became an activist right after that. Like she started going down and fighting for herself. She's like she met like the borough president. She doesn't like him, but she met him. She spoke to him, and she became an activist. She's talking about women's health care, right? Asthma alley. Those are the things that really bother her, and she got that from just learning throughout the curriculum. We're just talking about it. So that's how I kind of transitioned from being an activist to an activist teacher. That's kind of what I do now.
Pablo.
Hi, Adiola. Hey, Anthony. What's up, Dennis? Good to see you guys. Hello, everyone. Can you ask the questions again? Because I was listening to their stories and
introduce who you are, and
okay.
Why is climate change a concern for you, and why are you an activist, and how is activism part of your teaching?
Okay, so my name is Pablo Miriah. I've been a teacher in the South Bronx for 20 years now. I've taught in 2 schools in the South Bronx, University Heights High School and Alfred E. Smith, the campus. Well, why did I become an activist? Well, my story goes all the way back to 2001. I honestly wasn't going to become a teacher, and I had a Dr. Eisenberg here at Hofstra, and she told me go see Alan because I really needed to get my schedule done because I had to go to work. So I used to work from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, and then go to school from 9 to about 3:30, and then come back to the Bronx and do it all over again for a couple of years. So I told Alan, I just want to get out of poverty, man. I just want to get my degree and get out of poverty. I'm gonna be a lawyer, and I have a lot of friends who've been wronged by the law. So I want to take it upon myself to become a lawyer to sort of help out my community. And when I met Alan, I told him this, and Alan said, why don't you do it before they become teachers, before they go to jail? And I said, how's that even possible? And Alan said to me, become a teacher. And I started to laugh because I really thought that teachers, all they did was give out, handouts and basically bore you to death. So when I became a teacher, I went to the school in my old neighborhood. I did not attend there. I actually attended Aviation High School in Queens. So I thought that educational neglect was something, it was non-existent because in aviation I didn't deal with it. And then I came to the Bronx, right? And then I'm in a school inside of a college campus. It was a building, and while I was teaching, the girls and the boys used to jump on the tables, right, and scream. And I thought they were just like trying to play a trick on me, and it was because there were mice running around the room. So I was like, are you serious? This is really happening? I've never seen anything like it. So they're like, oh, don't worry about it. They started naming it Mickey and, started making light of it. I called Alan. I said, Alan, how am I supposed to teach under these conditions? We don't have an auditorium. We don't have a cafeteria. We don't have anything. So Alan said, well, just get the kids involved, show them how to do it, get them to do it. So I already knew the Ferrarian model. I was sort of playing around with the idea of Ferrarian and problem posing. So what I did was I started taking current events and I started using those as my do now to sort of compel the kids. But my current events weren't random. They're current events that deal with whatever the subject matter I was dealing with. But I wanted to show them that there's a continuity between the two. Like things just don't happen. There's a reason for it, right? So, I started getting the kids to question the classrooms. How can you question something you've never seen in another classroom before? So one of my main points was to bring the kids to Hofstra University every year. Okay, so they can see a campus, they can see what an educational institution really looks like, and so they can get the idea. So we started doing that, right? And that was working very well. Then I did another piece where I started, going with upper level schools, like private schools in Riverdale, and we started going back and forth. They did a podcast on that a while back, and it was extraordinarily effective in getting the kids to critically question their circumstances. Because again, you cannot critically question your circumstances if you don't know that you're in those circumstances to begin with, right? So as Adiola said, and this is interesting, Adiola, what Long Island is, condense it and then put it in the Bronx. It's exactly the same thing. Riverdale is like Garden City in comparison to Kingsbridge, which will be Hempstead. Throngs Neck is paradise in comparison to the South Bronx for the moment. Parkchester is now ultra working class immigrant enclave, which is completely different from the kids who are in West Farms who are impoverished, right? So you're going to have different kids with different issues. So what I did was throughout the years, I kept doing it. So the first thing that happened was I got the kids involved by questioning their own areas. I started having them just look around the areas and jot down information. What do you see that's not normal? Garbage on the streets. Let's go. What do we do about that? You know. So first all the problems, then a list of solutions, and then finally the kids. I got them to get so interested, because that's the point. The point is not pushing your political agenda. The point is to get the kids to critically question their lives in the larger context and how does it affect them. So I had them go into community board meetings, and then they went on their own. This I've been using ever since. I get them started, and then I am on your look. You can call me at any time. If it's about the activism, call me at any time. I will not tell you what to do. I will not. The most I will do is guide you appropriately. Like, why do you want to do this? Or is this what you want to do? Okay, so let's find ways to do it. Call me tomorrow. So see, I'm doing several things here. I'm getting them to read, increase literacy, right? So whether you read the daily news, the New York Times, on a web, a blog post, you're reading. You're being exposed to this. So, and then the ultimate thing is then joining. So I had them go to politicians. Finally, we got several million to the school. We got a new building. I mean, damn, new building. We got a new gym. We ended up getting an auditorium. We ended up getting classrooms. We ended up getting a lunchroom. All of these wonderful things. And then they let us enjoy it for about 3 years. And then in 2009, the college came and said, "You've done a wonderful job, and thank you very much, but now we need the space back." And the school was there from 1982, okay, all the way to so it's almost like even some of the teachers blamed me for being displaced, because they were like, if not for the activism, we would have still been in there. See, but so I did have that pushback. So if for those to ask about pushback, there's always going to be pushback. So we fought. We were supposed to end up in Taft Building with 7 other schools. Because of the activism, the kids ended up at South Bronx High School with only 1 other school. The problem was it's across the street from a detention center. Okay, so this is why we were fighting, because it's like, you're going to take the kids from a college campus and put them across the street from a detention center. This is almost criminal, and they did it. They did it, and so, but the beauty of it was, from that point on, those kids kept going even when they lost. So they were going to, they were fighting in PEP panels. They started taking on other interests that had nothing to do with the class, but it was amongst themselves. In fact, just last week, a student that was part of that group, he is the chief of staff of the Assemblywoman here in the Bronx. And he came to my class, and I have one of the student teachers from here from Hofstra. And it was wonderful to have the chief of staff of the assembly person explaining to the kids how politics works and opening up opportunity for them to come and volunteer. So yes, we lost that fight, but the kids kept going. And so eventually I moved over to Smith, and in Smith, the same problems persisted. And again, I used the same method of problem posing, all right, using the idea of critical pedagogy and critical literacy, and sort of combining the two. I used to tell this to Dennis, because he did student teaching with me at last leg. And I said to him, we could put the best possible lesson plan together. But if the kids don't take to it and don't like it, we just did a beautiful presentation. That's all we've done. We haven't done anything, So we need to bring them in. How do you bring them in? By, again, their lives must be set front and center, okay? First, we're all human. They're teenagers, so they're super selfish and super self-centered. And as they should be. I hate to say this, they should be super self-centered. And part of that self-centeredness is having concern for others. So in 2019, right before the pandemic hit, that young lady you saw that spoke at the end, that was one of my students. By the way, Alan didn't even know she was there. Alan didn't know any of my kids were there. I saw this on the Young Turks, and I said, Alan, were you at the rally? So were my kids. Do you know, were you with my kids? They spoke right after you. And Alan was like, no. But my kids, the young lady, 3 people after, that was Alan. These were some of the poorest kids, the poorest kids in the nation. I work for the 14th Congressional District in the South Bronx, the poorest in the nation. Okay, And these are kids that my principal said, Pablo, they're gonna leave. None of them are going. And purposely, I put it on a spindle on my website because all my kids showed up. They all showed up at the climate strike. They were all there. They took pictures. They uploaded the pictures. They wrote about it. And when the next day came back, I told the principal, I said, "You saw what just happened." And he sort of ignored it because he was like, "Oh, yeah." But the idea was that none of them were going to show, and most of them did. So what am I bringing to the table? What I'm telling you is that this is not a lost cause. Climate change is a real thing. Okay. Right now, I'm actually doing a whole lesson with the student teacher. We did this whole lesson on housing inequality and how all of it connects to housing, policing, health. All of those things connect, every single one of them. And it's unfortunate that we haven't addressed those issues head on, but I don't think we can. I honestly do agree with Alan. This has to be a grassroots effort. The way I see it, by the way, and I'll leave it with this. My original goal was to leave the projects and never come back to the Bronx. I never wanted to come back to the Bronx. Not just because it was, it's impoverished. Who wants to be poor? And when I became a teacher and came back, all of that kind of went away and it became a mission statement. We cannot hope that outsiders or anyone comes and fix our problems. Our problems need to be fixed from within. And our job as teachers is to sort of guide students to live the best possible life. And I mean with honest and truthful information, not fluff, not, I'm going to teach you how to, this word for the next 3 weeks. It doesn't make sense. We need to tell them, listen, economics, ultimately you need to buy a home because that's how you pass on wealth. And there are plenty of tools. So I'm telling the kids about some financial tools you can use as a homeowner. They're telling me they never even heard of this stuff. Well, 99.999% of my kids are renters, okay? And they're generationally poor. So how do we break that cycle? And I think it takes a large part of the commitment to get the kids to sort of realize their position and then see where they want to be. Because it's not up to us either. I can't tell you, oh, you need to be middle class. This is important. No. Some people like, whatever station they are, and it's not my job to make that judgment call. My job is to ask, to sort of help them and guide them through this educational process through critical pedagogy. And again, I think is extraordinarily effective. By the way, last thing, when I was doing my PhD and I was putting out emails to who wanted to get interviewed, I'm going to tell you that I had over 30 former students, some of them lawyers. One of them a pop star. Not a pop star yet, but she's up there. She's known in New York City and whatever. And I want to say even one who took on the post office. Out of all things, the post office. I ended up learning about the post office through her. I didn't know all the intricate details about the post office. She taught me everything. She was like, it's a federal thing, Pablo, look, and they're getting rid of it. And she wrote to Senator Gillibrand and she got something back and she ran with it. And she ended up going to Hofstra University and getting a degree, and she's a teacher and as a bunch. So I want to tell you that this is not like one or two.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Adiola. Now for a special treat before we open discussion, I have a high school student who recorded her statement for us. Her name is Sadia Wiener, and she's a high school student in Brooklyn. And just incidentally, she's my granddaughter. I want to introduce Sadia Wiener, who is a high school junior in Brooklyn, New York, who will read her climate manifesto.
Every inhabitant of this planet must contemplate the day when this planet may no longer be habitable. This declaration was made by President John F. Kennedy in his 1961 speech in front of the United Nations. He, of course, was talking about nuclear war and the threat it could pose to humanity. However, his words can be associated with another, fast approaching and categorical crisis. Climate change, climate change, climate change. I'm guessing you've heard this phrase hundreds of times. I know I have. In school, on social media, in commercials, in the last presidential election. But even though we are so familiar with these terms, most don't understand the true gravity of the situation that humanity has gotten itself into, or how it has gotten so bad. Government climate policies didn't start being passed until the 1990s, just a few decades ago. Former President Trump rolled back over 100 environmental guidelines, paving the way for capitalist corporations to think of new ways of plundering the earth and making life worse for communities that are already in need. According to the 2019 IPCC Special Report on Global Warming, many regions of the earth, usually ones with higher amounts of disadvantaged groups of people, have warmed by over 1.5 degrees Celsius. And while that may not seem like much, if this number reaches 2 degrees Celsius, severe heat waves, droughts, and other natural disasters will frequent many areas of the world, including cities with millions of people in them. A system that favors free market capitalism and deregulation has allowed corporations to profit off of environmentally hostile trade agreements and an absence of labor restrictions. The climate denialism of capitalist corporations and government officials giving slack are to blame for the crisis. And while on the surface, through ads and commercials that claim they are looking out for the environment, and then encourage middle-class people to make sacrifices such as riding their bike to work or recycling, acts that, by the way, will do little to change what is happening to the planet, these corporations continue to extract resources and use fossil fuels. No need to practice what they preach when they are making money. There are no consequences, and they know it. Capitalist corporations need to be held accountable for their actions, and that's not going to happen overnight. People, especially the younger generations like us, need to fully grasp what we are facing. Unless you want to leave a disaster-ravaged world for your children, it is up to us to solve the problems that our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents created. We will be unable to change the minds of corporations if we don't even truly believe what is already approaching. A few years ago, I came across an article about the Florida Keys. Every single year, this area is flooded by tides from rising sea levels due to the changing climate. Many living in those areas refuse to believe that climate change exists and is getting worse. How could these people not realize what was happening when they were experiencing it? I felt angry about what is happening to the environment and our world, and how so many people can choose to believe that it isn't. I closed out the article and continued scrolling through others on completely different topics. Florida was so far away from New York, and flooding wasn't the worst thing that could happen if these people were used to it happening every year. Best not to think about it when it's miles away in the future. So I went on with my daily life, going to school and my other activities, not realizing that that is the problem. We are all deniers of climate change, even if we don't want to admit it. Assuming that eventually new technologies will magically find a fix to the problem, or that it's not up to us to try and make change, is just not going to cut it. Yes, buying food in paper packages rather than plastic containers may feel as if it is doing something. But in actuality, the real change needs to be made at the top. Corporations need to be held accountable for their actions. So how are we going to do this? Before you make a purchase, find out where the materials come from. Were exploitative practices of extraction used? If so, consider not buying from that company and research others that use similar practices. Next, if you have a social media platform or website, consider publicizing these corporations with problematic practices and convince others to stop buying from them. In these media campaigns, refer to certain strategic decision makers, such as politicians, for people to contact. Lastly, encourage people to share your media campaigns so that word can spread about this issue, and how corporations are only making things worse by taking advantage of the environment and people in need just so that they can make a profit. As President Kennedy reminded us, every inhabitant of this planet must contemplate the day when this planet may no longer be habitable.
Now we come to the best part. We get to talk amongst ourselves. So if you'd like to say something, just unmute. You could ask questions or
Something
make
better for myself. I was starting to get comments from well-meaning people
it
that
happened again.
would say
Wait.
to me, I don't understand how you can work out so much and still be so big. Then I tried Noom, and pretty quickly I lost 10 pounds, which to me was huge. I hadn't seen the scale.
Okay, I'm sorry. High tech here. Comments, questions? Who would like to introduce, say your name, where you're teaching, just so people know. Alexis, is that you? You wanted to go first?
Hi. Sure. My name is Alexis. I am an elementary school teacher, a substitute teacher in Long Island as well. Thank you all to the panelists for sharing, and it's been a true pleasure to be a student of Alan's and work with him and our colleagues. I just want to comment on what all the panelists had basically touched on, and something that I find important not only at the high school level but at the elementary level is that what we teach the children has to be relevant to their lives outside of the classroom. I know Pablo had said the kids' lives should be front and center, and Adiola had also mentioned that how the kids were interested in the grocery stores and why they weren't, as up to par as others in their neighborhood or residing neighborhoods next door. I think that's one of the most important parts of the teacher is immersed in their living in right now, not just teaching for the next exam and just giving a pointless worksheet out to them. Just getting them involved in where they're living and what's going on in the world around them.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
Just want to mention something. Just want to mention something happened with my student teacher, which I thought was amazing. But I just need you to understand what I'm about to say. I don't know if this is gonna make sense. We were teaching about what is a community of color, of people of color. What do you call a community of color? And can you give us an example? And the kids kept giving us every example except for themselves. And I said, guys, and I said exactly what Dennis. I said, oh, how many white kids in the school? And one of the kids said, oh, they're these 3 kids. I said, no, they're Puerto Rican, they're not white. And he goes, oh, well, that's none. And I said, so what would this be considered? A community of color. They don't realize they're a community of color. And we're talking about also Black kids. So you need to understand that when they think community of color, I think in their minds, they're thinking like purely just Black kids. And that's it, just like a bunch of Black kids and no one else. So that does become an issue. That's why the consciousness, they need to understand that who they are, ahead of time, I'm assuming.
I would like to really concur with that. I'm sorry, concur with what you just said, Pablo. And, and we talked about this before at another conference we had where, although our communities resemble each other, my kids, again, get to go outside. They have trees, they have grass, and they have food in their bellies every day, right? And so, they're not starving, right? And not to say your kids don't eat, but you understand my point. And so for me, my goal is to just get them to be aware of what you even just said, that when we are talking about the voting rights laws that are being passed in 42 states right now, or trying to be passed or have been passed in Georgia, or we're talking about January 6th, or when we're talking about, the fact that people are contesting Detroit and Atlanta and all these votes, they're talking about your communities. And a lot of the kids don't get that, and like I mentioned earlier, when you live on Long Island and everybody's so segregated and you don't see, right? Because you're in this bubble, if you will, right? And you don't really see how different your community is. You think this is the norm and you're not sure exactly why you need to fight and what you need to fight for. So I totally agree with you. Just that bringing that awareness to them in itself is critical.
No, just related to that, 2012, the New York metropolitan area was devastated by Hurricane Sandy. There were, some of you may have been closed out of your homes without electricity and water for a long time. But that was 2012, that's 9 years ago. And, it was a once in a millennium event, but it's gonna happen again. The storms are getting more intense. It's only a question of time till another one hits our area. But it's like, well, it didn't happen. There's a story, guy jumps out of a 10-story window and he's at the 9th floor and someone says, how you doing? He said, so far it's okay. And then he's at the 8th floor and someone says, how you doing? He says, well, so far it's okay. And he's at the 5th floor and he's at the 3rd floor and so far it's okay. And then he hits the sidewalk and it's not okay. And we're not paying attention. I think this is what Pablo's talking about, critical pedagogy. We're not examining falling off that roof and where we know we're going to hit the floor. And so we don't see it immediately. Because we don't see it immediately, we don't react. And what they're saying about climate change is that in the next 10 to 12 years, the Earth could reach a tipping point where it may not be possible to reverse the impact of climate. So this is an emergency, even though we don't see it. I think that's what Greta Thunberg has been talking about. Other thoughts or comments?
I just want to add to what Pablo was saying about it was a little different, but he was talking about how his students didn't understand that they were like a group of color. Like when he said that, if I didn't hear it myself, I wouldn't have believed it. I was teaching my ENL students about like environmental racism. We was talking about minority groups, like how they're a minority, like they're the minority, right? We were trying to teach them, and they didn't understand. My ENL students, 3 of them are from Dominican Republic, 2 of them are from, I think it's Honduras. I think, Honduras. I have like about 5 of them that are in person, and they didn't understand that they were the minority. They didn't understand that concept. So I would have never you would have said that to me, Pablo, and I didn't hear that from my own students, I probably would have been like, nah, I didn't believe him. It's just crazy how some people, and like Adiola said, it's really about, bringing awareness to them. Sometimes they come from situations where they don't know, they have no idea about themselves. They don't know about the systems that they're placed in. And, sometimes you have to, say just outright, you have to tell them directly, you're in a group of color, you're a colored group of people, or you're a minority group, or you have to understand that. And then after that, it becomes the lessons so what do you do? How do you become involved? And those are the questions that I try to think about as I'm teaching when when I hear those responses.
And here's the practical part. For every kid that breaks the cycle of poverty, they take a whole family with them and they broke it forever. So I think that that's super important, particularly in areas that are highly impoverished, condensed and impoverished. Those areas may seem like it's a waste of your time going there to teach, but it's really not. It's just that things that you may take for granted. I mean, I'm a parent now. Thanks, Alan. I'm a parent now. As a parent, I never would have thought that we have such an impact on our children's education. Little things like I can't even begin to explain. I mean, I look at my 4-year-old and then I see the behaviors, and it's like, oh my God, it's like dealing with an 8-year-old and then the 4-year-old. They just, there's no communication, and I've seen that on a couple of occasions already. So parental involvement is so important. But what do you do about kids that don't have parents and that come from broken homes, which is mostly the condensed people in those communities? And that's what I think that it's all about climate change. Obviously, we need to live in this planet, but if we don't get the most vulnerable to fight, if we don't train them to fight this, they're going to be the first to feel it more than anyone else. And COVID has proven that, because even not myself, I'm not a science major, but when I had the students at Hofstra, I had some science majors, really intelligent young people. And all of them seem to have come to a consensus that even the virus is connected to global warming. And they expect more viruses and more spikes in these types of viruses, you know, as the planet and the climate changes. So they're important. They are it.
Yeah, you wanted to
I
jump
want
in?
to say, yeah, I just wanted to say some, I guess it's more like a question, right? The fact that we have so many of our scholars in melanated communities, that's my new word, because I'm tired of saying black and brown. I want to say melanated. In melanated communities, and they're fighting for racial justice, right? Even though they may not be directly doing it, right? But they're fighting it. They're fighting it every day. And there's no free time for them to even focus on the climate. And this is why when Alan asked me to do this, I said, Alan, yeah, my kids care about the environment. I know that they do. There are pockets of them that do, but there's some of them that are literally fighting every day not to get stopped by the cops, right? Or to walk through metal detectors, or for somebody not to bother them about the scarves on their head, whatever the case may be. That what time do they have to fight the real issues of climate change? And it is critical for everyone, right, to fix these neighborhoods and to invest in these neighborhoods so that our kids can have the free time to fight for what we really need to be focused on, and that is saving this planet.
I just want to say one last thing. One of the things I had my kids do 2 years ago, the most practical thing, I told them, what's missing in your neighborhood? They said trees. And then I told them, call 311. And then when you call 311, take a screenshot and I'll make that a quiz. And all the kids ordered trees for their neighborhoods. So all them trees should be up by now, you know? So it's stupid, it's small, it's tiny. And Pablo, what are you doing? You're giving them credit for asking for trees. Yeah, I think asking for trees is more important than writing an essay on a tree that's dead and giving it to me when I'm not gonna do anything with it. You might as well do something practical. And so, you know, a year later, the young lady you saw there, she was the one who said, you know, they put that tree up in my neighborhood. I said, yeah, 311, it works. That's the best thing Bloomberg left us with.
Deb, you've been trying to get in.
Hi, thanks. I'm Deb Willett, and I actually work at Hofstra in the library in special collections, and I'll quote unquote say my specialty is African Americans on Long Island. So we're kind of a different type of community from the African Americans in New York City. We go through kind of a different type of mindset. But what I want to know is, how do you keep your students when they have a setback or when they reach a barrier? How do you keep them thinking that they can go forward and they can step over what they want to do? Now, like I said, on Long Island, in the neighborhood that I was raised in, you just throw money at it. How do you keep them focused on the fight? And this is for anybody.
Real quick, I'll just say the way I keep them focused is sort of continue to, give me a second on that one.
I'll go. I think it's important, and I think it was Alexis that said keeping the curriculum relevant. And I think that if you continue to keep it relevant, you have to always address whatever is in the curriculum and tie it into their lives. So number one, they could keep coming to your class, right? Even if they're not saying anything, they keep coming. The fact that they're showing up let you know that you're doing something right. Even if they don't talk, they're showing up, because they will easily avoid your class if they didn't like it. So that's number one, I think. The other piece is, I think it's important to notice the kids. And what do I mean by that? Notice, for example, even on this platform, I had a student that was putting on his camera for 2 quarters, and then all of a sudden he stopped, right? Well, I had to call him after and speak to him. So noticing your scholars, noticing what they're doing, how they're moving, how their grades are changing. Is it going up? Is it going down? If it's going down, something is going on. I had a lot of my students that lost family members to COVID, unfortunately, and to other illnesses, and you see the behaviors change right away. You know, the grade is a big indicator that something is going on. It's okay to pull the kids to the side and talk to them and let them know I'm here for you. And I think those are some of the strategies that I use to keep kids at least focused and letting them know, look, you know, there are a lot of things going on in the world, and that's not to minimize what you're going through, but you can make it. You will be fine, you know?
I think part of the way we keep the kids focused is we have to stay focused ourselves. We have to stay focused on the injustice that we see around us. We can't just ignore it and walk by. We have to be angry.
And consistency. And consistency. You have to be consistent. First, the rapport you set with the students from the beginning of the year is important. So Dr. Pizzone used to call it creating a space, right? So how to create a space that'll open up for the kids and give them the ability to be creative. And I think that's the most important part. And knowing that in your class, they're not competing, they're working together. So I don't, even kids that get 100 on the test, I don't make a big deal. I'll make a big deal about tests. And when I give a test, it's like, okay, guys, it's almost worth nothing. It's up to you. I mean, I will do the test just to get the grade, and the kids will actually do much more than just the exams. So I think when you really set that rapport and they know that you're genuine about it, you know, hey, this came up, this climate change, you know, you can't turn around and be like, look, I'm busy right now. I got things to do. Oh, whoa, climate change. Let's talk a little bit. And I'll stop what I'm doing, because if this 16-year-old wants to talk to a 40-something-year-old, that's kind of cool. You know, think about it in that sense. Young people, why would they want to talk to a 40-year-old? You should feel honored. That's all. I mean, and they'll be there.
Liz?
Yeah. Something else too, if I could step in, is asking a lot of questions and providing opportunities. I think that if Pablo, when Dennis went to Pablo and said, hey, why are there all these metal detectors? Why do we have to do this? If Pablo had just told him the answer, if he knew the answer and just told him, it probably would have just ended there. But instead he said, well, why don't you look into it? Why don't you figure it out? You know, creating that opportunity and asking those questions that got Dennis involved and curious into it. You know, kids can be very curious, and they can be very powerful when they are given the opportunity to. I think a lot of teachers sometimes will say, oh, that's too advanced for my kids, or, oh, you know, they're not able to do this. When in reality, if given the opportunity, they can really surprise you. I think with a lot of the protests and all the movements that are happening that are kid-based, everyone's surprised. Every time a new one pops up, they're like, oh my gosh, all these kids got together and they had this crazy protest, and it was surprising and amazing. And it's like, why is it surprising? They were given the opportunity to save the planet that they are going to inherit, and they did something about it. They were encouraged to do it. You know, Pablo's kids actually went to the protest because they were given the opportunity to, and they were encouraged to. You know, it wasn't just, hey, you can do this if you want, or, you know, here's the issues and why it's a problem, but instead they were given control of their own learning. They were asked questions and they got curious because of it.
One of the things that Sadia raised in her presentation, I think it's important that we need to consider. And that is, she had read a book by Naomi Klein called Climate versus Capitalism. And that's what precipitated her piece. And what she discovered is that it's not just that the economic system we live in ignores the problem. The economic system we live in creates the problem, because it's a system based on short-term profit, not long-term protection for the environment. It's a system that marshals its own wealth and private property, but basically craps on the public spaces, the air and the water. It's a system that invented a company, the idea of the limited liability company, so they don't have to be responsible for the damage that they create. That's a real issue. I mean, do we live in an economic system that is stacked against addressing climate change to protect the earth, to protect the environment, to protect human civilization? Do we have to change the economic system that we live in? Carla?
Sorry, I'm just walking into all of this and taking this in. Apologies for being late. In terms of, I'm sorry, like I don't really know what to exactly comment on.
Can we address climate change within the current economic and social system, which is based on profit and also injustice?
Honestly, that's a question that I think about a lot, and I hate to be that person that's a bit cynical about it, but I don't know. I just think it's absolutely so massive. I can't imagine possibly like stripping down like capitalism or something. That's my point of view on it so far.
Alexa, I think you're going to be the last person to speak. Or Anthony, what would you like to add anything?
Yeah. Oh, Anthony, do you want to go?
I can say something. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. When it comes to addressing those issues, especially when something seems so convoluted or something complex. In my year as a social studies teacher, and I work at North Shore Middle School, the biggest thing I've noticed is that in the 7th grade class that I teach, the most important thing when you construct that environment is trying to develop a dialogue, and not just dialogue of student to teacher or teacher to student. You want the students to be able to interact with one another to see like how they assess each other's ideas and to kind of like reflect as a class as far as what kind of takeaways do we have. Although like something like an issue where we have the issues of climate change and activism into something that might contrast with the capitalism motives of lots of corporations, what's important at least is that we can acknowledge that from a student perspective and see as far as like how that makes us more in tune with the issues that are going on in the country and also from a global perspective. You might not come to the answers that you want, and I think that if you're able to come to a solution in a classroom setting, you shouldn't be in a classroom. You should actually be running for Congress, I think, if you're able to come up with a solution at that point. But as we kind of function just as a human being, I just think that if you're able to just think for yourself and try to come to those assessments, then that's the least you can do, especially when it comes to a classroom setting.
Alexa?
Yeah, I found all this really interesting because like growing up, student activism wasn't really like pushed upon me growing up in high school and middle school. So the one question I do have is, how do you foster activism during remote learning?
Well, any of you can answer that. Oh, now Carla wants to speak. Go on, Carla.
Okay, just to clarify my previous statement, I support like student activism. I didn't know exactly what the context was of what was happening. I thought you were asking a general question about capitalism, and I think that's a very broad question that we shouldn't situate to students in that way, honestly, because it's a bigger force than everything. But I think it's integral, honestly, to talk to students about those things and encourage questioning a system as large as that and analyzing it and everything else, and starting at a local level. Like at the end of the day, like I can be myself, I'm the teacher, and I'll be like cynical on my own time, but I will never admit that to a kid or anything like that. And I think they themselves realize that depending on the age, that it's like, yes, it's a massive problem, but you have to start somewhere, especially on your local level when it comes to like any type of change, whether it's environmental change or like anything related to social justice. In terms of how to teach like social justice in a remote setting. So in my school, the curriculum is very geared towards that. They're very much like real world application, doing field work, like hands-on type of learning thing, and learning through experience, learning through like having experts come and speak about a certain topic. And when it comes to like race and activism in my school, they finally accepted. They were like, okay, we got the approval to openly be like Black Lives Matter, which is like wild, because in my school they're like very, very progressive. And it's like, and I don't know, it just makes me think of like, it's really that controversial to say that even in such progressive spaces, it took so much to say like, yes, Black lives do matter. Yes, you can formally start that organization at school, make affinity groups, like, so that was already a big deal for us. But now, because of that, and due to all the political climate, what we were able to do a lot was like, my school brought in guest speakers, and I think and they talked through, on Zoom and everything like that. I was actually talking about this earlier today because it came up in my other class actually. They actually brought in two like youth activists, like they were young themselves. They're like in their 20s, so it was like relatable to them. They were part of an organization, I don't recall the name right now, but basically they're like community activists, like community organizers. And they were explaining that their job is like violence interrupters, and I had never heard that term before. So I learned a lot too, just by being there along with them. And then they were discussing how they kind of organize like a chain communication system in like communities that have like a high crime rate. So they essentially are so involved in the community, and they kind of would hear down the grapevine like, hey, like something's popping off, maybe like something at 4 o'clock or something like that, and they will literally go and try to like de-escalate the situation. Like they're trained, obviously, like they have like conflict resolution and training and stuff like that, but they were just explaining how that's like one way in which like it's seemingly a small thing, but in a local way you can actually serve your community, actually do something as a young person. Because I feel like that is also another thing that it's like, you feel that they probably feel like as young people you don't have as much agency, or you can't really make a difference. But they were and then they told the kids like, you don't necessarily just like have to do that, like if that sounds very intense, because it has been intense. They were telling us some of their experiences like as violence interrupters, like violence has actually happened, unfortunately, even despite their efforts. But it was like a good like panel, and the kids were asking questions about like how they got involved into this, like and stuff like that. So it was just like a good means of like getting kids to know that like, hey, you can actually make a difference, and you can like resist a lot of things, like resist white supremacy, things like that, and do something about it, not just be like a bystander. So yeah, so I think panels and expert speakers is a big thing that we've been able to do right now, since we're not able to physically go to places because of COVID.
Another thing that has helped, it is really hard to get kids to organize via Zoom, virtually, but you could do online petitions. I had a bunch of kids who actually signed a petition. We were signing a petition to invoke the 14th on Trump for the insurrection. And I thought, I said, let's do this as a class project. A couple of schools did it together. Alan called, we were all going to do it together. And the kids were really into it. They all signed. They all signed. That's the first thing. And it drove us to a larger conversation. Also bringing in elected officials. I've done that twice this semester, and that works highly well. And I want to see also community board meetings. They're doing it virtually now. So now you can actually get the kids to go easier, because now it's not like you don't have to go anywhere. Just find the Zoom link for your particular community board and join. And so those are good ways, but I'm not going to lie to you. There's something at the physical level when you're physically there with the students that you can do that you can't do it when you're not physically there. I don't know what to call it. I think that's the pedagogical piece right there, like the interpersonal piece, that although you get some of it on Zoom, it's nothing like the real thing. So that's what's made it harder to get kids to really get involved in anything at this point, because we don't have that personal touch as we used to. So,
Madison, would you like to join in?
No, I'm okay. I like just listening.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Dennis, and then we're going to close it up.
No, I was just going to add on to what Pablo was saying, and that piece where he's talking about like that interpersonal piece of being in person. It also ties into what Adiola was saying, talking about like, it's on Zoom. So the moment they close the laptop, you're back to your home and they're back with those issues that they have at home. Adiola was talking about, some like when she first started talking about like, how in the South Bronx, Pablo deal with certain students who, might not eat at home, right? Or her students are dealing with issues when they go outside, they're being stopped by the police. Those different issues, once you close the laptop, is different, because when I left high school to go to a community board meeting, I went right after high school, right after. Then I went home. Then I had to deal with what I had to deal with at home. But I wasn't dealing with it. So now it's a little bit different because you close the laptop, you open it back up. Some of my students right now are in my class taking care of their younger siblings while they're in class. You're right. So imagine my student closing the laptop. Hey, economics is over. Let me jump into a community board meeting. And then your little sibling is like, I'm hungry. Can you make me something to eat? So they're not really paying that much attention to the community board meeting, rather where, it's in person, you get there and build, you get that kind of atmosphere. Like when I went to the community board meeting for the first time, I was like, oh, this is what it looks like, So that interpersonal piece where you're talking about that in person is important because some students, whether it's like climate change, whether it's police brutality, over policing, whether it's, metal detectors, whatever it is, like, this component of being on Zoom does like affect that kind of aspect because those students have more issues than just that. They're dealing with other issues and that are real to them in their community.
I think what you're raising is the purpose of this whole conference. And that is, we've been locked down and we've been isolated from each other, but these issues remain, and these issues are very, very powerful, and we have to address them. And I think the purpose of this conference is that we need to be ready as the quarantines are lifted, as people are vaccinated, to get a jump start on addressing climate change and addressing social injustice. That these are things that cannot wait, and they will only be addressed if people are mobilized. And it means as teachers, we have to support the ability of students to be mobilized because that's what's going to change. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'm going to close the recording now.